And we're going to shift our attention for the moment to the compliance data itself. Because ultimately I know the data plate, yes, has to be created, it has to be applied to the asset, but it really is about the data, which is what's also important to the government. And as a supplier or contractor, you've got a lot of pieces of data that make up not only the data plate, but how the data gets reported. So speak to the compliance data, if you will, when it comes to making a plate to begin.
A very good point here, Peter. The compliance data is extremely important from the perspective that you're supplying that data to create the label. Now, when you're talking about compliance data, let's start with the cage code. Obviously, that's a 5-character identifier. Your part number and serial number is really where the test is, because when you're dealing with part numbers and serial numbers, in terms of compliance data, those particular items can be made up either of an alpha or numeric character, letter or number. You can also use a dash or a / character. Those would also be considered compliant as well. Where you run into the challenge is if your part number, let's say, has a character that's not made up of either, again, the alpha numeric dash or /. If that's the case, let's say you have a pound sign as one of the characters in your part number for whatever reason. That would have to be done one of two ways. Either simply remove the non-compliant character altogether, or you're going to replace it with a compliant character. Usually what happens is when someone has a non-compliant character, they're going to replace it with a dash, or they'll just take it out altogether.
Okay.
But under no circumstances can any company make a compliant label using non-compliant data. So if you're providing a company who you're asking to make your IUID labels, with data that has a pound sign, an ampersand, a space is also considered non-compliant as well. If they're going to make you a compliant label, they should identify those non-compliant characters immediately and come back to you and say, look, you've got a non-compliant character. What do you want to do here? You want to replace it or remove it? But either way, it cannot be used in order to make a compliant label.
And all this is defined by the military standard 130, right?
Correct. All noted in MIL standard 130 for compliance in terms of the data, absolutely.
Which, of course, I'll mention also leverages the use of ISO standards, which is the international standard for asset identification, right?
Absolutely correct, Peter.
Okay, good, good. What else should we be thinking about when it comes to beyond the construct data when you're talking about nomenclature and other kinds of information that should go on the data plate?
Well, in terms of the data plate, first and foremost, you want to make sure you have the minimum requirement. And again, let's stick with construct 2 because that's generally used in most cases. You have your cage, your part number, your serial number. Again, if you're not using a cage, you can use a DUNS or a DODAC. So that's the compliant or minimum required data. You also have the option to add on some additional, what is referred to as HRI or human readable information that you can add on the data plate, such as your company name or company logo. Or if you're identifying some items that are, let's say, in an inventory or warehouse and you want to mark a particular pallet or area of the warehouse, floor 1, floor 2, that type of information, that is generally helpful for your internal use. In terms of MIL standard 130, again, it's just additional information. It really doesn't affect the compliance one way or the other.